The Bering Sea in January doesn't warn you. One moment the swells run at 30 feet. 20 minutes later they're 60, and a 125-foot crab boat out of Dutch Harbor is somewhere between the face of one wall of water and the back of the next, and her skipper can't see his own bow. The incident logs required a second pass before the details settled. One January night in the early 2000s, wind out of the northwest near 80 miles per hour, air temperature 4 degrees Fahrenheit. Water temperature 28 degrees Fahrenheit below the freezing point of fresh water, kept liquid only by salt. A man overboard at those numbers survives roughly 4 minutes before his muscles stop responding. The nearest Coast Guard air station, in Kodiak, sits nearly 600 miles east. Helicopter range in those conditions may be 150 miles before the fuel math kills you, which means that boat was, for all practical purposes, alone. The skipper had 8 men on board, a full potload somewhere around 120,000 pounds of king crab stacked in the hold, and a crack in the housing around the port wheelhouse window that was letting the Bering Sea in one cupful at a time. He had 2 choices, and both of them were bad. Turn broadside to run with the swells and risk a roll. Hold course into the waves, and let the bow take 60-foot walls of black water head on, every 3 minutes, for hours. He held course. If you are finding this interesting, subscribe so we can bring more to the channel. What happened over the next 6 hours is the kind of thing that doesn't make the national news because it didn't end in catastrophe. The boat made Dutch Harbor. All 9 men walked off. The crack in the window housing got patched with marine sealant and a strip of aluminum tape that one of the deckhands had in his toolbox. The crab went to market, and almost nobody outside that crew knows the night happened. That's the thing about Dutch Harbor. The disasters that get recorded are the ones where someone dies, where a boat goes to the bottom, where the Coast Guard pulls a body out of the water. There have been plenty of those times. Destination Times went down in February 2017. 6 men lost, in seas, much like that January. But the nights where someone made the right call, held the wheel, kept the heading, those nights don't get a file number. They just become part of what the guys on the docks call experience. Dutch Harbor sits at 53 degrees north latitude, wedged between Unalaska Island and Amaknak Island, at the end of the Aleutian chain, 800 miles from Anchorage. The road doesn't reach it. There is no road. The only way in is by air or sea, which means the only way out, when the weather locks down, is to wait. And the weather always locks down. The storms here don't announce themselves. 1 hour, the channel is flat, gray, almost reasonable. The next, winds hit 100 miles per hour, and the temperature drops 30 degrees in the time it takes to walk from the dock to the processing floor. The National Weather Service has a term for what happens in the Aleutians when Arctic air collides with Pacific moisture over open water. A willowa, unpredictable, violent. Gone in minutes, or not gone for 3 days. Nobody outside Alaska uses that word. Here, it's just Tuesday. The weather data took a long time to parse. Dutch Harbor averages 257 cloudy days per year. Wind speeds regularly hit 50 to 60 miles per hour. The harbor itself, despite the name, offers limited protection. The surrounding topography funnels gusts rather than breaks them. Fishing vessels have reported green water over the bow, in what officially qualified as moderate seas. Moderate. And yet, roughly 4,300 people live here year-round. More flood in during fishing season, the crab openers. The pollock runs when the population swells, and the docks work around the clock under lights, because daylight is a resource you budget carefully at 53 degrees north. The port processes on the order of 800 million pounds of seafood in its biggest years, making it the highest volume fishing port in the United States by weight, a record it has held for over 2 decades straight, according to NOAA's annual data. More fish pass through this harbor than through any other American port. More. The people who built that record did it without a road, without a hospital with a full surgical unit, without the infrastructure that most Americans assume is just there, underneath everything, invisible and reliable. They built it with weather gear and grit, and a kind of institutional memory that doesn't get written down anywhere. The old-timers pass it forward. When to run, when to hold, which swells to read sideways, which captains lie when they call in their position. That knowledge kept people alive. And over decades, it also created something the port has never quite figured out how to talk about. Because when survival becomes routine, the body stops registering danger at the correct volume. The fishermen who have worked these waters for 15 or 20 years will tell you the fear fades. What they don't always tell you, what takes longer to admit, is what fills the space where the fear used to be. There's a name for it in occupational psychology. There's a pattern in the accident reports, and it has nothing to do with bad weather, or inexperience, or bad luck. The most dangerous year a fisherman in Dutch Harbor ever has is usually his 7th. The 7th year. That number sits heavy if you turn it over long enough. Occupational psychologists call it risk normalization. The accident reports call it something more clinical. What it actually looks like, on deck, at 3 a.m., in 40-foot swells, is a man who stopped checking his harness because he's done it 1,000 times and nothing happened. But before we get to what the 7th year costs, you need to understand where these men are standing when it happens. Pull up a map. Go all the way to the left edge of Alaska. Keep going, past Anchorage, past Kodiak, past everything that still looks like America. The Aleutian chain runs southwest from the Alaska Peninsula like a fuse 1,100 miles of volcanic rock, barely above sea level, most of it treeless, most of it uninhabited. Dutch Harbor sits at Unalaska Island, roughly 800 miles from Anchorage. To the west, the chain runs another 800 miles before the last American island. Beyond that, Russia. To the south, nothing solid until Japan, some 2,300 miles out. The coordinates are 53.89 degrees north, 166.54 degrees west. That puts Dutch Harbor roughly at the same latitude as Dublin, Ireland, except Dublin has the Gulf Stream keeping temperatures mild. Dutch Harbor has the Bering Sea on one side and the North Pacific on the other, and between those two bodies of water, something happens that explains every statistic that comes later. The eastern Bering Shelf is shallow, a few hundred feet of water stretched over an area the size of several states, and it sits at the edge of the Arctic. The North Pacific, south of the chain, is warmer, deeper, and driven by entirely different pressure systems. The Aleutian Islands are the wall between them, and that wall has holes in it. Deep, narrow passes where the water and the air on both sides are constantly trying to equalize. The result is a meteorological collision that produces what the National Weather Service classifies as some of the most unpredictable storm conditions in the Northern Hemisphere. Wind speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour have been recorded at Dutch Harbor, not during exceptional events, but as a recurring seasonal feature. Average January temperatures hover around 30 degrees Fahrenheit, but the wind chill regularly drops effective temperature to below 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Waves in the Bering regularly reach 30 to 40 feet. Within living memory, storms with winds over 90 miles per hour have battered villages along this chain hard enough to end them. Dutch Harbor doesn't just sit near these conditions. Measured by raw cargo volume, it's the #1 fishing port in the United States, a title it has held, according to NOAA, for more than 20 consecutive years. The most dangerous stretch of water in North America, the busiest fishing port in the country. Those two facts were not supposed to land in the same sentence, but there's a reason they did, and it starts with what's underneath the water, not above it. The water under the Bering Shelf runs about 35 degrees Fahrenheit on a warm day. That detail sounds minor until you understand what it means for a body that falls in roughly 4 minutes of functional movement before the cold stops your ability to swim. 4 minutes. The crew of the Times, Arctic Rose Times, lost in April 2001. All 15 men gone, never got a distress call out. The Coast Guard found the vessel on the sea floor in 428 feet of water, with no explanation that fully holds. That's the sea these men chose to work, and they chose it because of crab. King crab specifically times Paralithodes kamchaticus, times a creature that can reach 10 pounds and sells for prices that, by the late 1970s, made a single good season worth more than a decade of any other fishing work in Alaska. Dutch Harbor had the geography. Sitting 800 miles southwest of Anchorage at the edge of the continental shelf, it put boats closer to the crab grounds than any other port on the map. The math was brutal and simple. Go there, pull pots, come back rich, or don't come back at all. By 1980, the Alaska king crab harvest pushed toward 185 million pounds in a single year. Read that again, 185 million pounds. That's roughly the weight of a fully loaded Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, pulled from the ocean in 12 months. Dutch Harbor exploded processing plants, canneries, fuel docks, a population that tripled during season and nearly vanished after. The money was real, so was the body count. The period between 1990 and 1999 saw an average of roughly 22 commercial fishing deaths per year in Alaska waters, with the Bering Sea accounting for the largest share. According to the Alaska Department of Labor, the part that stopped the analysis cold, most of those deaths happened not from freak storms or equipment failure alone, but from exhaustion. The race structure of the fishery, where every boat was competing against every other boat for a share of a season-wide quota, meant captains ran for days straight, crews worked 30-hour hauls, and men made decisions at hour 28 that they would never have made at hour 2. The season was open, the clock was running, and stopping meant losing. NOAA and the North Pacific Fishery Management Council moved to rationalized quota in 2005, the Crab Rationalization Program, which assigned each vessel a fixed individual fishing quota, an IFQ. The race stopped. Officially, boats could take their time, fish in better weather, let crews sleep. Fatal injury rates dropped by roughly 80% in the years following, according to a 2012 analysis published in Times Occupational and Environmental Medicine. But the quota system did something else nobody fully predicted, something to the town itself, to who could afford to stay, and who got pushed out, and what Dutch Harbor became when the wild sprint ended and the math got cold and corporate. That shift is still playing out. The quota system rationalized the fishing. What it didn't do was rationalize the town. Dutch Harbor sits on Amaknak Island, inside Unalaska Bay, connected to the slightly larger island of Unalaska by a single bridge. The bridge to the other side, locals call it. And they're not entirely joking. Drive in either direction from that bridge and you run out of road within minutes. There is no highway. There is no road network reaching anywhere. The nearest city with a hospital capable of handling major trauma is Anchorage, 800 miles northeast. And the only way to reach it reliably is one runway. A runway that sits at the foot of mountains that manufacture their own weather on a schedule nobody has ever cracked. The approach charts for that runway are something pilots study carefully and come back to more than once. The Iliuliuk Valley funnels wind in directions that can shift 180 degrees inside a single minute. There are years when that runway closes for weather more than 100 days. Not delays, closures. The plane doesn't come. The supplies don't come. Whatever you need from the outside world waits. So the town built inward. Cold storage capacity on Amaknak Island now exceeds 50 million pounds of product, enough to hold a serious slice of the entire annual Bering Sea pollock quota in a single location. The fuel tanks at the port hold approximately 10 million gallons. The ship repair infrastructure handles vessels that would have to steam 1,500 miles to find a comparable dry dock anywhere else in Alaska. Dutch Harbor became, quietly, one of the most self-contained industrial nodes in the entire Pacific because it had no other option. That's the thing about isolation at this scale. It forces competence. You can't call someone. You fix it yourself, or you wait 4 days for a part to fly in on the next cargo flight, assuming the runway opens. But competence built around one industry, on one island, serviced by one runway and one shipping lane. That's a structure that looks like resilience from close up, and looks like a single point of failure from far enough back. The fishing companies understood this before the town did. After the quota system locked in, the economics of scale started pulling processing capacity toward fewer, larger, better capitalized operations. Between 2000 and 2015, the number of processing facilities operating in Dutch Harbor declined even as total tonnage held roughly steady. The same fish, fewer buildings, fewer workers, owned by corporations headquartered in Seattle and Tokyo and Bergen, Norway. The workers who stayed got steadier work. The workers who left didn't get replaced. And the town's year-round population settled into a slow compression that census after census confirmed, but nobody in the industry talked about publicly. What stays when the people thin out is the infrastructure. The tanks, the cold storage, the cranes. The question nobody's answered cleanly yet is whether infrastructure alone constitutes a town, or just the skeleton of one. The skeleton metaphor lands different once you've looked at what those walls are actually made of. Buildings in Dutch Harbor don't fight the wind. They're angled to let it pass roof lines pitched specifically so gusts redirect upward instead of grabbing a flat face and peeling it. That engineering choice goes back decades, worked out not by architects flying in from Anchorage, but by the people who had to live inside whatever they built. Trim tabs on the corners of industrial roofs. Exterior cladding bolted in overlapping sheets rather than sealed flush, because flush seals fail when pressure drops fast enough. These aren't aesthetic choices. Every one of them is a scar turned into a system. The thing that does the scarring is the willow wall. Meteorologists define it cleanly enough. A sudden, violent wind that accelerates down a mountain slope and hits the water or flat ground below with almost no atmospheric warning. The Aleutians produce them constantly. Dutch Harbor sits surrounded by the exact topography that generates them: steep volcanic ridges, narrow passes, water on three sides. A willywaw can go from 20 miles per hour to over 100 miles per hour in under 2 minutes. The National Weather Service station at Unalaska has recorded gusts topping 105 miles per hour in events that lasted less than 40 seconds. No front, no pressure system you could track on radar the night before. Just the mountain releasing something it had been holding. Fishing vessels in the harbor have snapped their own mooring lines. Not loosened them, snapped them clean, from boats tied to cleats, rated for forces several times their own displacement. The harbor master's logs going back to the 1970s document enough of these events that the industry developed informal color codes, not official. Just shared knowledge for which anchorage positions gave a vessel the best chance when a willywaw came from the north versus the southeast. One detail from those logs kept pulling attention back. A late 1970s event that drove gusts near 100 miles per hour across the processing floor area dragged a 40-foot shipping container approximately 30 feet across the gravel before it hit a retaining wall. Full container, roughly 30 tons, 30 feet, in under a minute. So the engineers adapted. Anchor systems for containers now use rebar-set concrete footings, sunk 6 feet into engineered ground. Buildings got lower profiles in the 1980s and 1990s, crouching shapes that sacrificed interior volume to reduce the surface area the wind could catch. The new vulnerability those adaptations exposed is quieter and took longer to show up. Lower buildings trap less heat. Narrower profiles mean smaller work floors. The infrastructure that was hardened against the wind became, in the process, infrastructure that fits fewer people and moves less volume per square foot than it did before. The buildings survived. The math inside them got tighter, and the thing about willywaws is they don't care what the buildings learned. The mountain doesn't have a memory of that container. The next event will hit whatever is there, adapted or not, and the only question is what the new weak point turns out to be. That tightness in the math has a human version. Between 1990 and 2023, the Bering Sea crab fishery killed more American workers per capita than any other industry in the country. NIOSH data put the fatality rate at over 140 deaths per 100,000 workers, in the peak years roughly 35 times the national average for all occupations. 35 times. That number takes time to absorb, because behind it sits a policy that nobody voted for and nobody named. The names accumulate fast if you start looking. The Times Arctic rose times went down in April 2001, roughly 200 miles northwest of St. Paul Island, in water cold enough to kill a man in under 4 minutes. 15 crew, 0 survivors. The NTSB investigation took 2 years and concluded the most likely cause was flooding through a fish hold with a hatch design nobody had flagged as critical. 15 men for a hatch design. The youngest crew member was 20 years old. The families of those men didn't live in Dutch Harbor. Most of them lived in Oregon, Washington, Alaska's interior. The boats leave from Dutch Harbor. The fish process in Dutch Harbor. The money clears through Dutch Harbor, but the grief lands somewhere else. The port absorbs the departure, the paperwork. The towns back home absorb what the sea sends back. Which is part of why the people who do stay in Dutch Harbor are hard to explain by any ordinary logic. The year-round population sits around 4,300 people across Unalaska, the island where Dutch Harbor operates down from its busiest years, when the boom kept more beds full through winter. The ones who left did so for the obvious reasons. The schools, the cost of a bag of groceries that gets flown in and sells for 3 times what it would in Anchorage, the darkness in winter, the medical situation where the nearest full trauma center is a $15,000 medevac flight away. A broken arm is a financial event. A heart attack is a crisis requiring a plane. The ones who stayed, what that looks like from the inside is worth sitting with. There are families who have held positions in the processing plants since the 1970s, the same facilities rebuilt after the same storms, working the same 16-hour shifts their parents worked. Their kids went to the school on the hill, played in the wind, learned to drive in the dark. The harbor is the only skyline they've ever known. Leaving would be the strange choice. But staying carries its own arithmetic. Every year, the fleet shrinks a little. Every year, the quota for king crab, the fish that made this port what it is, gets reviewed. The 2022 to 2023 Bering Sea snow crab season was closed entirely by NOAA, the first complete closure in its recorded history. The processors sat idle, the boats stayed tied, and the people who had built their entire lives around the sound of engines leaving the dock woke up to a silence nobody had a name for yet. That silence had a price tag, a very specific one. The processing plants, Unisea, Alaska, the others lined up along the waterfront, they don't run on fishermen. They run on a second workforce most people never think about. Seasonal laborers. Workers who fly in from the lower 48, from the Philippines, from Mexico, from anywhere. A recruiter posted a flyer promising long hours and good money, and who land in Dutch Harbor having never seen anything like it. The numbers are stark. During peak season, this port processes more seafood by weight than any other port in the United States, more than 750 million pounds in its biggest years, according to NOAA fishery landing data. Enough to cover the entire island of Amaknak in fish. And the people gutting, sorting, freezing, and boxing most of that catch earn somewhere between $12 and $15 an hour to start. Working shifts that routinely stretch to 16 hours on a floor that runs at 34 degrees Fahrenheit. 16 hours at 34 degrees on your feet. The processors call it the grind. The workers who've done multiple seasons call it something less printable. Those workers often arrive with a debt already on the books. Flights from Seattle to Dutch Harbor run $600 to over $1,200 depending on timing. Some companies advance the cost and deduct it from early paychecks. You land on an island 800 miles from the nearest city. You owe money before your first shift begins, and the next flight out isn't leaving until you either quit or the season ends. That's the structure. Everyone who signs the contract reads it, but reading something and understanding what it feels like to be 800 miles offshore with a negative balance are two different things. A floor supervisor who has worked the processing lines in Dutch Harbor since the mid-1990s, 3 decades watching the same machines. Different Faces has seen workers show up in sneakers for a 34 degrees Fahrenheit floor, seen people last 4 days and beg to go home. She's also seen the ones who stay 5 seasons, save enough to buy a house in Tacoma, and send money to families who'd have had nothing otherwise. The work is brutal. It's also, for some people, the only ladder available. What the port runs on, underneath all the king crab mythology and the Deadliest catch footage, is that calculation. Someone far away deciding the math works in their favor. flying 2,400 miles to stand in the cold for $13.50 an hour because back home, $13.50 doesn't exist. And when NOAA closes a season, when the crab don't come, when the quota collapses, the fishermen lose their income. The processing workers lose something harder to replace. They lose the reason they came 2,400 miles in the first place. The boats have insurance. The workers have a ticket home, if they can cover the cost. Then the sea changed. Not slowly, not in a way anyone could ignore. The water started warming, and the numbers started moving in one direction only. NOAA's temperature records show the eastern Bering Sea has warmed roughly 4 degrees Fahrenheit since the mid-1980s. 4 degrees sounds like nothing. In the context of an ocean ecosystem calibrated over millions of years, 4 degrees is the difference between a crab fishery that produces 200 million pounds a season and one that can't sustain a commercial harvest at all. That's where we are now. The snow crab, the species that filled the crab fleet's holds for a generation, crashed so hard that NOAA canceled the 2022-23 snow crab season entirely. The first such closure in its recorded history. NOAA research estimated that more than 10 billion snow crab disappeared from the eastern Bering Sea between 2018 and 2021, collapsing to historic lows. Scientists at the Alaska Fisheries Science Center pointed to warm blob events, patches of Bering Sea water sitting 5 to 8 degrees Fahrenheit above normal for months at a time as the core driver. Warmer water burns more of the crab's caloric reserves. They starve from the inside before anything eats them. From over 10 billion animals to a remnant in 3 years. The Bristol Bay Red King crab season has been closed or severely restricted since 2021. The Opelio quota fell from tens of millions of pounds a decade ago to levels that have processors running their lines at half capacity. The math that made Dutch Harbor viable, dangerous, brutal, but viable is being rewritten by something no quota system and no union contract can negotiate with. The crabbers who survived the 2005 rationalization did it by going deeper in debt to buy quota shares. They bet everything on the resource being there. Some of those loans are still running. Some of those boats are worth less than what they owe because the quota attached to them is worth less than it was 5 years ago. A vessel that carried $2 million in transferable quota value in 2019 may be carrying half that today, while the mortgage stays fixed. The processing companies have started moving capital. Some are investing in salmon, in pollock, in species that are for now holding. The workers follow the seasons, same as they always have. But the seasons are shorter. The windows are narrower. Dutch Harbor processed on the order of 770 million pounds of seafood as recently as 2018, according to NOAA records. The trajectory since then is not a plateau. The fishermen who've run the same grounds for 30 years talk about recognizing the sea the way you recognize a face, the currents, the swells, the way the fog sits at certain temperatures. They say the sea they know is still out there somewhere. They're looking for it. The ground underneath Dutch Harbor is losing its grip. Not to thaw, this is not the frozen Arctic coast, but to the sea itself. The storms that hammer this chain have been arriving over warmer water, carrying more energy, and the coastline has been paying for it. Along the worst-hit stretches of the Aleutians, storm-driven erosion now eats several feet of shoreline a year. Sketch that on paper and it lands hard. A standard shipping container is 20 feet long. Some of these coasts surrender a container's worth of ground every few winters. The infrastructure at Dutch Harbor wasn't designed for a retreating shoreline. The docks, the processing plants, the fuel depots, they went up in an era when the ground was assumed to be the one thing you could count on. Pour the concrete, drive the pilings, anchor the whole operation to rock and gravel, and get to work. The sea has been renegotiating that assumption one storm at a time. The harbor's exposed faces take the worst of it. Winter storms that used to arrive and exhaust themselves against a stable coast hit ground that's already been softened, already been cut. Each storm leaves the next one a better angle of attack. The engineers who study this describe it in terms of feedback loops, cycles that accelerate without requiring any single catastrophic event. The damage compounds quietly. incrementally, until the increments add up to something you can't ignore on a map. 750 million pounds of seafood moving through a port in a single year requires cranes, cold storage, fuel lines, refrigeration units, loading docks that can handle boats the size of small apartment buildings, all of it sitting at the edge of a sea that keeps taking bigger bites. The question the harbor hasn't fully answered yet, the one that kept surfacing through the infrastructure assessments, is whether the buildings will outlast the shoreline they're standing on. People who stay get asked why. Fishermen, dock workers, a woman who runs a supply route that hasn't changed in 30 years. The answers were different every time, but underneath all of them was the same thing, not stubbornness exactly, something older. The Bering Sea rewards people who have already made their peace with discomfort, and Dutch Harbor selects for that, quietly and continuously, the way pressure selects for certain kinds of steel. The Unungan have held this coastline for over 9,000 years. 9,000 years of knowing exactly what this water is capable of, and choosing to stay anyway. That's a calculation the rest of us haven't figured out how to run. The workers who come now, the ones rotating in from Seattle or Anchorage on 90-day contracts, most of them leave. The ones who don't start talking differently about the place after their second winter. Something shifts. A veteran longshoreman once described it as, the harbor gets into your math, meaning, you start measuring risk the way the sea measures it, in probabilities you can't fully name, but can feel coming, 3 hours before a barometer drops. And the sea is changing its demands. The warming water has moved where pollock feed, shifted where crab go, and drove the collapse that emptied the crab lines. The economic loss to Dutch Harbor was immediate and physical. Cold storage rooms that should have been full, sitting empty through a winter that didn't care. The harbor will adapt. It always has. But the next adaptation isn't a new dock or a better crane. The next adaptation is figuring out what to fish when the fish the whole infrastructure was built around decide to move somewhere else. That answer doesn't exist yet. What does exist is a town of roughly 4,300 people sitting at the edge of a sea,